Okay. Uh, hey there. How's it going?
It's going great.
Um, yeah. Hi, I'm Colin. I'm the fundraising chair of the Game Writer Diversity Alliance. And this evening, we are holding our annual fundraising stream with the amazingly talented composer Gordy Haab. Um, Gordy, for those who don't know, I'm assuming most of you know, but for those who don't, Gordy is a well known composer, proven track record working on games such as Star Wars Battlefront, Halo's War 2, Star Wars Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, um, and most recently, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. He's also worked on the massively popular Chinese film epic Creation of the Gods, with currently two films out for that. And yeah, thank you all for joining. Um, Thank you so much, Gordy. How have you been?
I'm doing great. It's been kind of a crazy year so far. I think for a lot of people here. But yeah, doing really well, man. So thanks for having me. This is really cool.
Yeah, it sounds like it's been kind of crazy for you in the last like couple of years, really.
Yeah, it's been busy nonstop, and between being extremely busy and neighborhoods burning down in my home city here, it's been kind of a crazy start to the year. But we're all good, and we're championing forward with everything. So
Yeah.
it's great.
Glad to hear things have been safe. For those who don't know, LA earlier this year had a bunch of fires, and I know it was a little bit too close to comfort for you.
Definitely.
I think let's just kind of kick it off. The most recent game that you worked on, Indiana Jones, which was not the first Indiana Jones you worked on, actually.
Yeah. So funny enough, actually, the very first video game I ever was hired to write music for was Indiana Jones game. It was called Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings. It was for Wii and I think PlayStation 2, maybe. I'm gonna blank out completely on the era, but yeah, I mean, this is probably like 15, almost 20 years ago, something like that. So it's kind of really cool to come full circle and come back to the franchise and get to sort of dip my toe in that world once again. The world that brought me to scoring games in the first place, which so it's kind of a cool full circle moment for my career and just life in general.
That's amazing. Yeah, how does it feel like? I mean, all those years, about 15 years later, um, to I mean, you've been living in this John Williams world for a while, but you haven't returned back to Indiana Jones in a while. Did, did you get a chance to look back at, say, the music that you did for that first game? Do you feel like you've changed significantly as a composer since then, or do you feel like I've just been doing my thing this whole time?
I mean, yeah, I think I've changed a lot as a composer. I mean, I did actually, when I was working on The Great Circle, I looked back at some of the music I'd written for Staff of Kings, and I was kind of just analyzing it and seeing if I can break down just even my own thought process. I mean, one sort of consistent thing that I've done throughout my career and all the projects I work on is I'm very sort of diligent with like sketching things by hand and then archiving it. So, I was actually able to go back and look at my original sketches, which sometimes mean absolutely nothing to anyone but me. It's just like I could see myself just making notes to myself on like how I break down certain harmonic things or that type of deal. And so I did look back at a lot of stuff, but I feel I've grown, musically, in that time period, and so like a lot of things I was looking back at, I felt were for lack of a better way to put it, it's like, oh my God, it's got thrown into the mix with this thing. And so it was derivative, if anything. And, like I just wanted to try all the things that, you know, that a young composer, I guess, if you can call myself that back then, wanted to try with an orchestra at that time. It's like, oh my God, I finally had this opportunity to do something like, really cool in a franchise that I grew up with. And so, I wanted to try all the cool things I'd heard in all those scores. And now looking back at it, I'm like, oh wow, I've really kind of evolved. I've found ways to sort of fold my own personal aesthetic into these franchises that have existing music, with the expectations that fans bring with that. I've certainly developed sort of ways of dancing around sort of the John Williams esque sort of styling, but also kind of make it what's most natural to me, which is my own musical aesthetic. So I think that's the big takeaway from that is like looking back on, I'm like, oh man, I really, I was thinking maybe there's something in there I could like sort of repurpose or reuse or like re-explore. And I was like looking at, I'm like, nah, man, I'm just gonna put that away and do something completely new. Gordy of this era working on Indiana Jones and see what happens.
Nice. That's got to feel good to be like have such a very distinct record of how much you've grown into your own as a composer, into your own sound. A lot of people starting out, they tend to, find a sound that they can latch onto. But
Yeah,
yeah,
totally. And and I've definitely gone through phases like that as well. And I just think once you're quite literally just in your studio writing every day for like an excess of a decade or more, it's like eventually like all of these little things that you wanted to try, you've tried them all in a way, and so you kind of get into this zone where it's just like now I want to just write what I hear in my head, what makes the most sense, and find ways to make that fit with the franchise. And in this case, because it's based on existing franchise, so I just kind of evolved, but didn't really notice it was happening, I suppose. And now here we are, fast forward whatever 15 years, and I've written maybe quite literally like 100 hours of music or something like that for like the Star Wars franchise, for example. And like I can hear, that slow evolution. Like if I listen to what I had done for like the Old Republic, for example, compared to what music I've written for Jedi Survivor, it's like, man, I really have like evolved, sort of musically, and in some ways good, in some ways I've simplified things, and you know, I think it's just natural artistic growth.
nice. Yeah, that's actually touches on a bit on another question I wanted to ask you, which you've had the opportunity to write for so many different franchises, and I think Star Wars is definitely probably the biggest one. From Star Wars Hunters to Star Wars Battlefront to Survivor, and I was looking at the scores earlier on, and each one of them, yes, they're very much Star Wars, but they're also very much unique in their own
Yeah,
approach and taste. How do you go about taking such a known sound and shaping it for the needs of each individual project?
yeah. I mean, that's a really good point and a great question because that's true. Like each one of these Star Wars projects, and if we want to just focus on that franchise, because I've worked on I don't know maybe 10 different Star Wars video games over the course of 10 or 15 years. And each one of them had sort of a different assignment attached to it. Like the Old Republic was, well, this actually, the time period exists, thousands of years before what we know of the film franchise. So it's like, what would the Baroque music, if John Williams was modern, the music we hear in the films was modern, what would the Baroque music that influenced that sound like? And that was sort of like the goal there. And then fast forward to something like Battlefront, which was very much like, a kid found the shoebox of their Star Wars toys from when they were a kid, and it's like that nostalgia factor had to be there. So it was like really digging into like the way Williams wrote the scores for those films, and kind of like trying to pull as much of like that palette into my own palette as possible. To something like Jedi, where it's like, well, by no means are we abandoning, what John Williams wrote, because it's obviously like a huge influence on the music we write for that game. But, it was the opportunity to sort of branch away from that the most of all the Star Wars games I've worked on. So, it's like each one sort of has its own, assignment, so like Hunters was an interesting one because the way it was described to me when I was brought on board was we're doing like WWE Raw, wrestling in the Star Wars universe, or like cage fighting, it's like, what would that sound like, So like instantly, like I was taken back to when I was a kid, watching these, like wrestling on TV with my family. It was like, it was always about like kind of like hard rock, kind of thing. It had like a metal edge to it. So, I brought in this heavy metal band called Galactic Empire who like specialized in, taking music from the Star Wars franchise and like playing it as a metal band, and collaborated with them, and sort of put my orchestral stylings blended with their metal stylings, and kind of came up with something that was kind of unique but kind of fit what it was for in Hunters. And each one of these games has something unique like that. That kind of forces me to like, it's like when you get parameters, sometimes a complete blank page can be extremely like intimidating and make it actually really hard to come up with something. But like if you say, okay, here are these little parameters we're putting around this thing, what the style is, but we also want to have like a metal edge to it, and we want to have this, and suddenly we build these like these walls around the ideas. Suddenly, like ideas for me start to like really bloom a lot more, because no longer is like the sky the limit. It's like, okay, I'm playing with these colors. How can I put these together and make something cool? So, and I mean, each project's had something like that kind of gave me an opportunity to really kind of like try new things out and experiment and find new ways to kind of play with that material, but fold my own, weird ideas of how to write for orchestra into it. So
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about giving a limited palette and seeing what colors you can make out of that.
yeah, exactly.
Uh, that's really interesting. You bringing in this. I mean, that must have been stellar for them to get a chance to work on Star Wars when they make these, this Star Wars covers.
Yeah.
Uh, do you find you have a lot of opportunities to do these kind of unusual collaborations, or approaching instruments you may never you don't usually get to use in your day to day? Like how do you go about you doing these interesting assignments?
Yeah, that's a cool question, because I mean, again, I go back to the fact that every project has its own sort of requirements, and each thing has to have its own tone and sound. But one of the things I really love doing more than anything is learning about music. I mean, I feel like I'm a student of music. I always was. I will be till the day I die. I mean, I'm a student of it. I love learning new, like, musical ideas, like musical cultures that I've had not experienced before. So I'll give an example. You mentioned the Chinese film series called Function, or Creation of the Gods is the American translation for it. And but what's so fascinating about that film is it's a film based, over 1,000 years ago in China, and so they wanted to have very period specific instruments that were used. So I actually took an opportunity to fly to China, and I spent like 3 months in China studying ancient Chinese music. Toured around the country and met people that were specialists on instruments that haven't, really been used in, popular culture in, over 1,000 years, and they should give me demonstrations and like, let me ask questions about the instruments and kind of learned how they work. And so that's like sort of a big part of my process, is to always sort of like figure out what it is that's going to be new and unique about this, and dig into it, because it's an opportunity to learn something cool, to learn something new. And I have fun with that. I mean, it's like I used to play in heavy metal bands when I was in high school, so I had like a little bit of a foundation for, working with the Galactic Empire guys, and, at least I could speak the language, you know,
Mm.
but I hadn't done anything like that in so long. It was almost like, I was just throwing ideas at them, like, what if you did this? What if you did that? And they would spitball things and send it back. And we kind of went back and forth. And, it just kind of goes to sort of to prove like a couple things, like this idea of being like a student of music. It's like, it's key to development, just like as an artist, as a person, I feel like you just grow that way. But another thing is like so vital to me, and really just makes this all fun and worthwhile, is just the collaborative effort. And in a case like that with the Hunters, for example, it's like getting to work with these guys that, I heard one of their videos the day Battlefront 1 came out, and I thought, oh my God, these guys are like badass, man. Like, and then so I reached out to them, and I became friends with these guys. And, so I was looking for an opportunity to work together with them. And you never know how collaboration is going to go, but it turned out that like they understood me, I understood them. It worked out great. Another obvious key example is working with Stephen Barton on the Jedi series. That's the thing that like I think probably neither one of us expected that would be a collaboration. We both went after this project, and then it sort of was like unilaterally decided by Respawn and EA that we put a team together. These two guys, and Stephen and I had only met maybe once, maybe twice, before we actually started digging in and working on that score. And so I learned his music, and he listened to my music, and we kind of went back and forth and really kind of just tried our best to kind of like figure out what makes our musical minds tick. And I was able to learn a lot of things from him, and I think maybe vice versa as well. But like that's kind of what's cool about this world in games. There's quite often a lot of collaboration, which I think is really cool. And for me, it's like if you're a composer, you know this. I mean, you're sitting alone in your studio by yourself, just working hours on end.
Yeah.
Not a lot of communication with the outside world. It can get kind of lonely. So having a collaborative scenario really gives you this opportunity to like make it fun, bounce ideas off of someone before any of the brass hear it. You know what I mean? So that kind of thing. So collaboration, student for life, man. That's the way.
Nice. Yeah, I think a lot of people have this idea of like, the composer sitting in their dark room by themselves by candlelight, and that's all there is to it, this lonely existence. But the reality of the situation is that you get to collaborate with so many different types of people, with
Exactly.
the other composers, with directors, with the orchestra, which is that's such an interesting experience where there's so much collaboration that happens. Um, in the moment. You know,
Exactly. Yeah, in the moment, and then sometimes like with the example of creation of the gods. I mean, well in advance. Because a lot of these musicians that I toured around and met while I was in China were the musicians that we also brought on to play the those parts in the score. So it's like even before I had written a note, I was already collaborating with musicians, which is a kind of a cool feature of that project in general. It's just the getting to work with other musicians and just learn new things. And there were things that I remember them demonstrating that I'd never heard in my life, and so it's like I got to remember. I'm recording everything. And I'm like I have to remember to like try to do something like that. And while I was working on it, it's like this is an instrument that doesn't even work in like Western notation, for example. So I would communicate back and forth with these artists, and during the course of writing the music. So it was collaborative even before I started writing. It was during it, and then of course even in the mixing stage of things. And once it was all recorded and done, it's like how those instruments get featured and how to make them sound like like they were part of that period. That's just that's that's fun to me.
mm,
It's much more than just being in a room by yourself.
yeah. Well, kind of winding it back a little bit. You're very well known as the Williams whisperer for video games, and it's been that way for a while. But how did you get your start in composing in general, and then just how did you make your way into video games?
So composing in general, that's it's almost kind of an easy one because I've known that I wanted to do this since I was like 6 years old or something like that. Like I remember seeing ET in the theater. My parents took me to see ET when I was young, and maybe I was 7 or 8 or something like that. And I just remember like going home after we saw that movie, and they're asking questions like, "What did you think of this character, that character?" And I couldn't remember half the characters' names, but I could sing every note of that theme. It's like it just stuck. There's something about it, and I became like really fascinated at an early age in the impact of music to story.
Mm,
And so I kind of always knew I wanted to do this. So everything I've done throughout my life is sort of like aimed towards this point. But sort of fast forward, I obviously went to college for music, and when I moved out to LA, my goal was to like get into writing music for horror films because I really love writing music for scary films. My natural aesthetic is very textural, and I like working with like interesting colors in the orchestra to kind of create this these eerie sort of things. And so that was my goal. I was like, I'm going to come out here, and if you were to ask me what my mission statement is, it would be to like be the next Chris Young or someone like that who's like just well known for doing like horror. And I got a good leg into that world. I probably scored, I don't know, maybe like 30 feature length horror films, and like only like two of them ever really did anything, but I had a lot of experience doing that. And then one of the directors that I was working with was this young director who had made like this short film. It was like a horror film. It was a short film, and we worked together on it. We had a really good time. And he said, I've also got this thing that I'm working on with a buddy of mine. It's a Star Wars fan film. It's called Ryan versus Dorkman. It's just him and his buddy fighting with lightsabers in their like regular street clothes or whatever. And but they choreographed the thing, and it was actually pretty brilliant. Like the choreography is like mind blowing, and they're both VFX artists, so they were able to like make it look really cool. And we long story short, because it is a pretty cool story actually. Like we ended up like sort of convincing fans of their first one to raise enough money to hire an orchestra and to do the score. It's like a 5-minute film, and so we record this thing, and it goes out on YouTube in like 2005, something like that, where getting 5 million views was like, that was astronomical. That didn't happen in that era. And but it did in like a week. And one of the people that saw it was someone at LucasArts, and they were working on a Indiana Jones video game, and they liked the music from this thing, and they actually reached out to me, and I ended up getting this gig, kind of using that Star Wars fan film as a demo, and and then I did okay on the Indiana Jones game, and so I ended up getting hired to do the Old Republic, and then it just kind of took off from there. So it really kind of, I had not even thought about getting into games, to be honest. I was like really focused on film.
Mm.
And I kind of fell backwards into it, but saw a cool opportunity and jumped at it, and it just developed from there. You know.
Oh, that's awesome. For I hate to say this, for the younger people in the crowd, that video, which it came out very early on in like YouTube's, like very early on in YouTube's existence,
Yeah.
did like pretty big numbers. It was one of the early viral videos on the platform, which is definitely dating some of us here
Dating
who remember when it came out. But it's such an interesting, nowadays it's not unusual for someone to get their first, their big breakthrough an internet project or through
right.
you know the internet in general. But back then that must have been such a, you know against the grain way of finding your way into a career. Most
Yeah.
Back then no one would have told you, oh yeah, just post something on YouTube, then you get seen.
Exactly. I mean, it kind of goes to a point though of like, with anything, with really any industry, but certainly with this one, it's all about who you know, and who you know is just by means of being there. You know what I mean? Like I would not have met that film director that made that Ryan versus Dorkman, Michael Scott. What's his name? Is his name? And I wouldn't have met him had it not been for going out on a jog one day and happened to notice someone was having a yard sale and selling a bunch of like Star Wars and Star Trek memorabilia. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to pop back by there on my way back because that looks awesome. And then I did my run and I came back and I was like kind of like sweating and just like, oh man, do I really want to do this? Why not? I'll check it out. And the guy having the sale was like, he's a writer, and he's like, I have this group of people that get together once a week in Hollywood at an IHOP. And we just have pancakes and we troubleshoot their films. It's like everyone in the room is a filmmaker. Come on by. And so I did. And I went every single Thursday night for like 2 years to this thing. And met so many filmmakers. And one of them was this guy, Michael Scott. And, so I wouldn't have even had that opportunity that caught the eyes of, Lucas, had I not been out for a jog one day and just happened to stop at the yard sale. So you have to kind of like always just be looking at everything as like some kind of thing that could lead to a great opportunity, and when I got into that, I didn't really ever think of it as like, oh wait, I'm in a career now in video games. It never felt like that. It just felt like I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying it. And then they hired me to do another one. And I'm like, oh my God, now I still don't know what I'm doing, but I kept trying. And then like, before I know it, we're here talking. And, I guess that is a career.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's something you said is really important that a lot of people don't really see. They go on Wikipedia or maybe they watch like a clip, and they don't hear about the 2 years of consistently showing up to an IHOP every Thursday. That didn't necessarily was going to be like, yeah, this is going to lead to something. You just went because you enjoyed being around people that love the things you loved, and it led to something.
Yeah, that's just it. I didn't go with this, this idea of like, oh, this is going to be the thing that launches my career. It was mostly people like either my age or at my level in the industry at that time, so like filmmakers that were just making their short films and just getting started out. And then, they would just like sort of troubleshoot, production problems on super low budget films together, and a room full of filmmakers helping each other out. And so to me, it was just more like a peer group than it was like a networking opportunity. It was just people doing cool stuff that I became friends with. And, if you look at it that way, I feel like that's a much healthier approach. Look at all your connections as just being friends. Make friends with people because, like, it's your buddies that are going to like sort of carry you, to the next thing, whatever that is. I mean, here was a case that, you know, I always viewed that group as just being like, I mean, I'm still to this day very good friends with a lot of people that were in that group. I've seen them get married and have kids, and I'm like, sort of like the god uncle to, to a couple kids, through that group. It just became a peer group, and not too different than what we have here. It's just as an opportunity for like-minded people to get together and work out, our sort of place in this crazy world.
Yeah.
Look at it like that, and less of like, what's this going to get me? I feel like it'll take you further.
Yeah, yeah. It's networking can be such an ugly word, but what it comes down to is just meeting people that has similar thoughts and feelings and interests with you and forming connection.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Well, speaking of these connections, and these kind of like interesting opportunities that have popped up fairly recently in the last couple of years. We mentioned this earlier, this creation of the God series, which a lot of people know you mostly for video games, but you've had this experience of working on films throughout your whole entire career. But for you, what's that process like, switching back between working in games and then doing films? And do you find that your mindset changes a little bit when you're working in different mediums? Or is it just music is music?
Well, if you want the short answer, I believe that music is music. So, I mean, I don't. When people ask me what I do, I tell them I'm a composer. I don't say I'm a video game composer. I don't say I'm a film composer, or a TV composer, or a concert stage composer. I do all those things. I mean, I'm a composer. I just like writing music. Um, and each one of these, sort of disciplines offers something completely unique to the next, as an opportunity for a composer to like, you know, try things out. And so, but there are some obvious big differences, and I had like tons of experience with film before I got into games. When I got into games, what I discovered is that it's a lot more involved. You know what I mean? It's actually like in many ways, it's actually kind of a harder medium to write music for. I mean, for one simple reason, if nothing else, the fact that there's usually a lot more music. So, I mean, a game experience can be 30, 50 hours, where film is a finite thing. It's 2 hours long or whatever it is, and that's it. There's not going to be more than 2 hours of music, unless, of course, it's Function, this Chinese film, which, they're all like 3 hours, but, it's rare to even be like a wall to wall score in a film. So games always have a ton more music. You have to really kind of think about like how you develop thematic ideas differently, because in a game, if you have that long of an experience and you state a big main theme in the beginning, and then like you would do in a film, through repetition you sort of teach your audience that theme is associated with this character or this location or whatever it is. you know After a while, that's going to get really tiring in a game that's that long. So
Mm.
with a film, it's like you might have 5 or 6 times to state that theme before the movie's over, and that's enough to sort of develop that idea in the audience's mind as being like the main theme. But in a game, it's like if you keep repeating it over and over again, it's going to get really old over a course of a long period of time. So you actually have to really sort of pace yourself on how you introduce ideas over the course of the score of a game. Particularly if it's a narrative game, like I'm thinking of the Jedi games, for example. Where it's like you're going to have this 40-hour long experience. Like let's start with just a grain of an idea and have it develop slowly over the course of that whole experience. Is much more of a challenge to do for a composer than it is in a film, where you have only so much time that you can kind of say what you want to say. Film has other unique challenges. Scoring a picture is one, I suppose, but it's something I always really loved doing anyway. So that kind of came naturally to me when I was working on that franchise. The thing that you never can quite, sort of count on or really plan for is how the collaborative effort will go with the people that you're working with. So with the game, you have a lot longer time to sort of develop ideas because the schedules are longer for composers. In a film, they're usually pretty fast, and there was certainly, working on Function, there was there's initially a language barrier, so we had a translator that I'd worked with to kind of bounce ideas back and forth, and things just took longer to get to like that final version on each cue. I mean, like a lot of the cues in the first film made it to like version 50 and above. So that was something I didn't expect. In a lot of film, it's usually a little not quite that intense. It's just the thing that's intense is the shortened schedule. But with games, you have a long time, and that's what kind of makes it cool. I mean, it's more difficult. You have to account for so many possibilities because the music has to be interactive. But like you also have, you know, a year or more. Like it's not uncommon for a big game to have like 2 years, um, for composing schedule. So those are the major differences between the two. But I love both. I mean, they're both sort of rewarding in their own way.
Nice. Yeah, it feels like it gives you. What did they say? It fills up your cup in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You talk about the amount of music, the sheer amount of music in
I think I lost you there, Colin.
approaching that. Um, it's oh,
Colin, I have lost you. So yeah, sure.
Hey, folks. It's
What's up, Dan?
Dan. I've been behind the scenes.
Oh, and there goes Dan. That's all right. Welcome back. We just talked about the big differences between film and games and the schedule,
yeah.
talking about how long you have to write music for games, etc.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny because everything still works. It just freezes on my end.
Yeah.
So I'm talking to the void here. Yeah. So the sheer amount of hours that you work on, the sheer amount of hours that you make for games is gotta be, you're sitting down and someone says like, yeah, you're gonna work on 3 to 6 maybe plus hours of music in a couple of years. How do you go about in your mind just kind of, you know, no one, people love to talk about, oh, the glitz and glamour of making the music, but there's something to be said about the organization of it all, because you're doing that plus probably a couple different projects at the same time.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty common to be working on more than one thing at a time, and I've learned over the course of my career to be very organized, building spreadsheets and tracking things and that kind of thing. And then, in a lot of these like larger games, for example, there are folks that are on the team that are there to help with that as well, to kind of keep track and tabs on everything. Um, but when you have multiple projects at once, it can get very tricky. So spreadsheets are the key. But then also just like sort of philosophically speaking, I think it can be very daunting to be like, oh my God, I have to write 8 hours of music for Indiana Jones and I have a year to do it. How am I going to do that? That just seems so big that it can just kind of frighten you into like, feeling like frozen. And so I really have to sort of break it down and say, okay, if I did that, how many minutes, seconds a day would I have to do this? Okay, so it's like a minute a day. Okay, I think I can handle writing 1 minute of music today. So suddenly it seems like a little easier. You just divide it up into sort of like smaller bites, and you just trust that system will work. and you just take one bite at a time. That's kind of the only way. I mean, you have to factor in certain things too, like things along the way that I guess when I first started out, I didn't really like account for is the revisions. For example, it's like, oh, okay, I write 1 minute a day to the deadline, then I'm good. But what I didn't count on was like, well, for every one of those minutes I'm going to write 3 minutes because it's going to go through two versions or something like that.
Mm.
So that's something that I've learned over time to sort of factor in. And I sort of handle that in an interesting way where I try my best to work a 5-day week. So I try to write from Monday through Friday and leave my weekends open. And then, rarely do I actually not work on the weekend. I usually do. But those 2 days are sort of reserved for catching up on things like revisions and that kind of thing. So I've sort of built in sort of a buffer zone to sort of help with that. And then the most obvious one is like when you have multiple projects going at once and they're high profile and this kind of thing is building a team, like a support system. And I have a great one. I have 3 people that have been working with me pretty consistently. Sam Smythe is somebody that's been working with me since I did Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings. So
Oh,
he's
wow.
actually been working with me for like 20 years. Marco Antonini came on board maybe about 10 years ago, and I was working on Halo. And then E.T. Chen, who's just absolutely fantastic, came on board during the Creation of the Gods 1 score, because I wanted to have sort of someone that could understand the language a bit, so like a translator on my side that so I could actually like learn how to sort of phrase things properly when giving pushback on notes or that kind of thing. So just somebody on my team that could also just be an ear in the room with meetings. And that's how it started. But he turned out to be like not only a fantastic composer but also like an amazing administrative person. He's extremely organized, so he kind of handles all those spreadsheets for me. So I built this like really trustworthy team, and we're all great friends, and we kind of like operate like a little band. And and I think that's kind of the only way really when you have like multiple things going at once, and the larger profile they become, the more necessary that is. And I used to think that it was would be frowned upon. Like I have a team, I have people that are helping with musical tasks, this kind of thing. It's like, that's going to look like I'm not capable, but that's not the case at all. What was actually the case is you're setting up sort of a fail safe because things in life happen. I recently, my wife lost her father, and
I'm
so
sorry.
thank you. But there was a period of time for like about 3 weeks to a month where it was a lot harder for me to get in here 12 hours a day and write music for all kinds of reasons. From just needing to be there for support, but also the emotional impact it has on me. These kinds of things kind of can kind of block that ability to write 12 hours a day. And people that hire me to do this kind of thing, I think that they would feel more comfortable knowing that there is a plan in place if real life intervenes, and to get things across the finish line. So team building is huge, and that's really sort of helped me along the way, and it's sort of grown over time as the career has developed and grown. I've sort of brought more people into the fold, and you know and we all have unique qualities, and we talk, we work more like a team than we do like individuals. It's like I send music to them, and I ask them what they think, and they give me thoughts, and vice versa, and that just really kind of makes it fun. Again, it's like part of the collaborative process as well, so it makes it more interesting and makes the day kind of go quicker.
Nice. Yeah, there's definitely a perception of the sole composer. Again, we're going back to that. You're in your room by yourself, candlelit, you know. But you're not a machine. You're a person, and people kind of need people in various facets of their lives to continue working.
Yeah, if nothing else, for like sanity check. You know what I mean? It's just nice to know that there's somebody there that's kind of going through it with you. You can kind of talk it out and figure it out together. So
Yeah.
it's very helpful in that regard.
Uh, yeah, that's. I mean, it's really nice hearing how you've been able over the years to find people that you can really trust and really, uh, you can respect and respect you and helps you along with your journey. Uh, I had another question. Again, very video game specific, but I think a lot of composers, whenever if they try to delve into video games, may have to come across this, as there's like varying degrees of this. Is the idea of, you talked a little about this, having a bit of a thick skin, you get a lot of revisions, but also the idea that like so much of your music is going to be experienced in a way that is outside of your control, by the very nature of being interactive. How have you been able to, I don't want to say come to terms with that, but to accept the fact that it's going to go through this engine and it's going to do different things, and it's still your music, but it may not. It's going to interact in ways that you never even considered.
Well, it's I equate it a bit to writing for an orchestra. So for me, like the most exciting thing for me to do as a composer is writing for an orchestra, than going to hear it performed. And not once ever in my entire life of writing music has what the orchestra played sounded like what I thought I wrote. I mean, you get closer and closer, but like they just bring it to life in a way, that is unique and amazing and completely out of your control. And so it's kind of like that in a way. It's like you don't really know what it's going to be like until it's there and you hear it, and it's like, oh wow, that's something like pretty amazing I didn't expect. And with games, I mean, you have this like this unexpected factor of the music sort of changing constantly based on the engine. And I think personally that I think it's really cool. I mean, I love like playing the games after the fact, and listening to the music and just thinking, oh my God, it's like not how I ever imagined that would happen, but it creates these unique sort of through lines, kind of on its own. I think that's fascinating. I mean, the other thing too is just, with games, you have to plan for that. That's going to happen in advance. So, how you approach the writing is with that in mind. And, so that's obviously key. It's not just like writing music and just flinging it over the fence and hoping for the best and having like people like put in a game and like make something really magical happen with it. Like there's thought in advance about like how this can work interactively. What can we do, to make this feel smooth, and make transitions work and all this. So you're going in with a bit of a plan, but even then it's like, the best plans don't always, pan out the way you expect them. And I think that unexpected thing is what makes it kind of cool. I actually really enjoy hearing what happens after the fact, and you can't be too precious about it either. Like I have
Mm.
an idea of like how it might go, and it's something different. I think that's just as great personally, because that adds to sort of like the excitement of the whole thing for me.
That's a really good outlook. I know a lot of people can struggle a little bit with that transition of like,
Yeah,
you spend so much time, for those who don't know, like a minute of music, especially when you're doing something very heavily, orchestrated, very thick in terms of the amount of instruments and like the action, sometimes that can take a lot of time, and you're living with that music for a very long time. And then sometimes you'll get no back being like, can we make it sound more like, I don't know, Olivia Rodrigo, which is
yeah,
like,
yeah,
like that's completely opposite of what you thought was where you were going, and then you've got to toss that out, and
and
if you can save
figure it
anything, great, yeah.
out. Yeah. But like I say, man, I think that makes it kind of fun, because it's like it's a new challenge every day. And then I think with the end product, getting to hear that, even though it's going to be completely different, particularly in games, than you imagined, just based on the nature of how interactivity works, I think is cool in a way that when I first started writing music, when I was in college, like my focus was pretty heavily on writing jazz.
Mm.
And so you can prescribe this section and that section, and you can say like, here's the chord changes, but like a lot of it is left up to improvisation. And so you don't know what it's going to really sound like until you hear it played, and then the next time you hear it played is going to be completely different than the time before. I mean, that's the nature of jazz. So it's kind of like that in a way. It's like I'm working with all the parameters I have. I've got all the right ingredients, and then you put it in the game, and then you let the game kind of naturally control it, and the outcome's different each time. And I think that's there's something kind of spectacular about that in concept, and I definitely enjoy kind of seeing it happen.
That's a really good perspective to keep in mind. We're getting close to the end of our time here. I did want to. You did bring something up. I wanted to bring to just talk about a little bit. Is your background in jazz and you're a trombonist by nature, and uh, you're such a busy person with all the music that you're working on and everything that comes with that. Do you find you still have time to pick up the instrument? And I know you do a lot of tennis. Like, what are the things that you do to keep yourself, not just a composer but a person?
Yeah, no, that's a solid question. So I don't play trombone as much as I used to, or probably would like to. It's one of those instruments in particular that in order to sound good on it, you have to kind of play it like a few hours a day. And I definitely don't have a few hours a day. So I started noticing myself sounding much less good than I maybe used to sound to myself. So like it was harder to keep it up because the results were diminishing just based on
Mm,
the amount of time I had to do it. I mean, there were many years, like probably the first 12 to 15 years of me being in LA, where I played pretty consistently. Like I'd play on recording sessions and that kind of thing. And then I also played in like wedding and corporate bands, like doing gigs on the weekends and that kind of thing. So, just enough to sort of like keep up, playing. But that all sort of took a back seat to the writing career as that developed more. So it went to the side a little bit. Tennis found its way into my life, sort of through a series of like health things that happened, to me maybe 20 years ago, something like that, when, I developed stomach ulcers and I actually kind of had a really close call. I'll just say
mm,
that, and I was in the hospital for a bit and a lot of the sort of the root of that happening was stress related. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to try to like make it as a film composer and do all this stuff. And then when I got a gig, I would write 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. There was not a week that went by in that era of my life that I didn't pull like a couple all nighters. And I think that stress and sort of impact on my health just built up and landed me in the hospital. And so from that, I sort of came to this realization that I needed to find some kind of like real balance in life, like something that could like take my mind away from music for just a minute so that when I came back to it, I was excited about it again. And so I sort of found a love for a sport, and it had sort of the double duty of like also being, healthy. So, it was like, it was helping my, my health in life and also helping sort of, you know, the psychological side of things, and really giving me some, a sense of balance and something to look forward to. And then it's so funny because there's many times where I'll be writing something and I'll just be like pounding my head against the wall, like I just don't know what the solution to this one thing is, whatever it is, and then I'll go play and I'll come back like a couple hours later and it's like boom, it just flows out, you know. And so something about having that little mental break and putting your focus into something positive, I think can really help kind of, keep the creativity flowing. And it was really difficult in the beginning, I'll be honest, to put any type of priority on it, because
mm.
when the deadlines are there and you're behind schedule or something like that, it's like the last thing you're thinking is like, well, if I go play tennis for a couple hours, this will all be great, But I had to kind of trust it, because I knew that balance was vital, and I trusted it, and it's always worked out. And it's actually become an important part of, honestly, my creative process.
Yeah, there's something to be said about the fear of not looking busy, the fear of not always being on,
Yeah,
but that's such a, a misguided way of going because ultimately, again, you're a person. You have to have a multifaceted life to really enjoy the things you enjoy.
you do, and it's a long journey too. So you need to have that balance if you're going to sort of maintain your sanity in this world. I mean, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of fun, but it can be stressful. So you have to sort of find a way to cope with that. And just that balance worked for me.
Nice. Well, I'm checking real quick to see if we have any questions from anybody. I'm not seeing any, so I am think we're good. Just real quick, I just want to shout out that we currently have a scholarship open right now, an application. You can go to our website, www. Game Audio Game Audio Diversity Alliance.org. And this is for our Game SoundCon scholarship, which is the biggest game audio conference out there. It's in October, late October, and we provide stipends. We provide um, mentorship. We pair you up with a mentor. Uh, we have in the past been able to bring people to studio tours of different places. So it's a great opportunity, and we try our best to, as a nonprofit, to provide access to education, to scholarship, to conferences, to mentorship for those that come from less representative backgrounds. So this current application will be open until this upcoming Saturday, the 16th. So for those who are interested, for those who may have been like, I'm doing the thing, I'm doing the game audio thing, but I need a little bit of help to meet people, to learn from people, this is one of the many opportunities that we provide alongside with education and other mentorship opportunities. So yeah, I wanted to shout that out. If you don't mind, I think we just got a question that popped up.
Cool.
Um, if you have the time.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Here.
So this is from Malachi. In your experience, how is collaboration with music designers on the dev team? Do you get a say in how the music is adapted to fit game systems, or the process outlined in the brief?
That's a really good question because it's different each time. But I would say that in all cases, it's collaborative. You know, I mean, there's certain games where I've come on board and they already had like a complete asset list of like every piece of music they wanted in the game, down to like how many seconds long it was going to be, like very detailed. And so in some ways I'm sort of writing to fill in these puzzle pieces that will eventually kind of put together the score. But even in those cases, like not that the original plan isn't always working, so you have to adjust along the way. And so like that's when I'll always offer up like my suggestions, my ideas, to something like the Jedi series in particular has been extremely collaborative. I mean, we talk about how music's going to work in game on a daily basis, over the course of working on that. And we adjust along the way, and everyone has sort of a say in it. I mean, yes, there's certainly like, there's a music and audio director on the game, and they have a very strong vision, and, but then they're also very trusting of the composers to bring something to the table. And, so it's always collaborative. I mean, that's the key. And the best ones are the ones like that, in my opinion. When you're coming to the table, sort of with a clear slate, clean palette, and saying, okay, what can we do to make this work? And I find that the game industry is very open in that way to like ideas and
Mm.
collaboration. So.
Nice. Yeah, that seems to be a running theme throughout this talk. I guess three things to take away from is collaborate, have hobbies, and spreadsheets. That's just my preference.
You do
Spreadsheets.
that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Gordy, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to talk with us. Again, folks, this will be up on YouTube. I think it may be saved on LinkedIn as well. So you can always come back, watch this if you feel like it. If you have the time, or if you have the ability to. We are taking donations. The donations will go to help things like the scholarship I mentioned. It will help people attend things like the School of Video Game Audio, where they can hone their skills, get mentors. It will help those from backgrounds not well represented being able to attend things like GDC, the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, as well as Game SoundCon, and other endeavors that we have. So yeah, we're a small nonprofit that's just focused on, trying to get game audio to look a little bit more like how our lives look like. Uh, but yes, thank you all for taking the time to watch. Thank you, Gordy, and
Thank you so much, and thanks for everything you guys do too. I mean, it's important, and you're doing it well. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Everyone, have a good night.